In this second half of the build, we're going to deal with the top of the table. A 10-foot long tabletop presented me with a number of challenges in how to joint it and deal with some twists in the lumber. So stick around and see how I accomplish that, as well as inlaying the logo in the top of the table, getting it finished, and installing it in place. I used the laser to put a straight line down the edge of the board. And then once I ripped that with the track saw, I measured over evenly to make sure I have a good parallel edge to that on the other side. And I had to combine multiple tracks here. So what I'm going to do is I measured along several locations. And then I'm going to clamp that down and use the little command strip type pieces in the newer tracks to kind of glue this down in place, keep it from moving anywhere. It worked really well. And then I'll rip that edge with the track saw. And once I got that done, I kind of cleaned up any spots with the jointer plane that may have little deviations in it. A common defect in lumber is a twist, and a twist can be visualized by using these winding sticks. And as you sight down the board, you can see that that end of the board is sloping this way. This end of the board is sloping this way. Another way to look at it is if you saw this board as, say, a mountain range, you've got a high spot here and a high spot here. So if this was a mountain and this was a mountain, and you have this valley going through here, if you cut the top of your mountain off here and the top of the mountain off here, you'd have a nice flat plane. Then you could turn it over and run it through the planer, or you could turn it over and do the same process. I didn't have that luxury because when you do that, you lose a lot of thickness of the board. You end up with a board that's badly warped. You may not ever be able to get it down that way. So the board I had wasn't near as bad as this one, but it was 12 inches wide and 10 feet long. I didn't really want to lose the 12 inches, but the only way I was going to get that twist out of it was to work it so that it was being counteracted by other boards in the top. So let me rip this board in half and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I've taken this board and I've ripped it down the middle. Now, unfortunately for this demonstration, this board was very twisted, but it also has a very big bow in it. So it won't be maybe look as clear. You can see the bow here. But what I'm doing here is that twist, to get it out, I'm going to rip it down the center, and then when I flip them over like this, all of a sudden the edge that is high is going to meet the edge that is low. And that's going to allow me to pull them together, and they're going to kind of counterbalance each other. In my case, I have more boards to put beside this, so I can use those to kind of help bring the twist out of these boards. So you can imagine I have a 12-inch board against these two 6-inch boards. I'm going to be using very long floating tenons to help kind of pull that board the way I want it to be. Going to use a lot of these along the way. And then I've also got boards on either side of these that are all nice and flat without any twist in them. And that should bring the two boards I have down. They aren't nearly as twisted as this board, but I think it will work just fine. And this board is now firewood. After I got all my edges straight and dealt with all the twists, I dry clamped it to make sure everything was the right dimensions, mark up where I want those tenons to go, and then using the Festool domino joiner, I'm putting in the mortises, and then using the plane upside down, I'm taking off the very edge of these mortises to make them a little easier to fit into the slot. What's that? You haven't subscribed? Are you kidding me? You gotta like and subscribe this channel to see more of it. now I guess back to the action. And then we go to glue up. I like to add a line of glue on the board itself, and then I usually kind of dip or paint the glue onto the domino itself, and then go to assemble. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble half of the table here, and then I'll do the other half, and then lastly, then I'll take those two halves and mount them together. That just kind of helps with timing and getting everything glued up. Using this board across the edge of it as a caul to kind of help things stay flat while it's drying, and then clean up with some glue. Now, once these two halves dry up, then I'll put those two together and clamp those and glue those. A little bit of sanding to get the edges flush, and then some final sanding before we move to the next step.
So the shaper uses these domino tapes to know where it's at. And I've got way more than I probably need. But here was my issue. As I was cutting out the design, when my test had started with it, and as I would cut it, it would start losing sight of things. So because this is a fair size and I had a bunch of stuff being cut away, I overdid the tape. And what I did was, once I cut this out, the circle, then I went back and scanned it again to see if there was anything, areas that would be missing, and I added some tape. So when I did the Y, I did the same thing. I looked, ran the shaper over the Y. If I saw where I was missing tape, then I kind of added some more tape, rescanned it. When I did the H, and which I did the B, I did the same thing. And I ended up with this horrific amount of the domino tape. But I believe it's going to work because everything seems to test fit. This one's going to have to be a little bit of maneuvering on that, but the letters seem to go in. Now I gotta get the tape off, and that'll help some too. But and we've got some little fuzzies in there still to get out. But this is going to work just like that.
Another good reason for not using so much tape is it's a pain to get it all scraped off. And then we get it fitted just right and glued in place and sanded, and wiped off, and then we have the finished product. I didn't want a perfectly straight end to the tabletop. It just made it look like a giant piece of plywood. So I didn't want that. So I used my Shape Origin to kind of design out a very gentle curve at the edge. And here I'm going to clamp this down and mark that out, hold it square to the edge of the table. Now, once I get this clamped down and marked out with a pencil, I'll take the template off, and then I'll cut just outside the line with the jigsaw. That way, when I go to route that edge to the template I created, I don't have quite as much wood to walk through. And here I am using the router to bring that edge back to the template. I'm sorry, I'm kind of in the way. It will take 2 passes, as you can see, because my router bit wasn't long enough to take it all in one. And Tanner approves of that edge. And you can see what the finished table is going to shape up to be like. Now, I'm not sure this next step is actually necessary, but I felt like it was a good addition to kind of help keep the tabletop flat. Is I'm going to install a C channel here, which is steel, and will kind of help keep that flat. And that just kind of lays down in those 2 grooves, and I'm going to screw that down. Again, not sure that's going to really do a lot or need it a lot, but I think it was a good insurance policy. Now here I am final sanding it again. And on with the stain. I'm using a Mohawk stain called Copper, just to kind of give it a little darkness to it, but not too much. apply it and wipe it off. And that'll go across the bottom and the top. So this is the stretcher piece. And then here's one of those trestles at the bottom. Not sure what else to call them, but a trestle. And since this top is so big, what I'm trying to do here is, so there's no streaking, I'm putting the stain on pretty much by the board or a couple boards, work all the way down, wipe it off, getting the edges there. And you can see that I'm kind of getting the next one following the boards and maybe the logo. Again, I'm doing this all at one time. It may not have caused any streaking, but I was just trying to avoid anything like that. And then kind of taking those last two sections together. Now here, when I get to the end of the table is end grain, and that absorbs the stain a whole lot more than the face of the board. So what I do is I usually use the rag that I've already wiped the stain off with, and that way I can kind of control the amount of stain going on there and get it to match a little bit better than applying the stain the way I did to the surface of the board. Once it's all stained, I'll apply the finish. This is a wipe-on polyurethane by Mohawk again. It dries really quickly, so I was able to add the top coat in multiple layers. I actually have 6 coats of the polyurethane on the entire table, kind of scrubbing it in, going across the grain, and then I will wipe that down with the grain. And this is, I really like this finish. It's a good, strong finish. Then in between each coat, I'm using a 320 sandpaper, and then I'm using tack cloth to get all the sanding remains and residue. And lastly, I'm using my palm sander with a felt polishing pad to go over it really good to kind of polish out any nits. So once it was done, I got it loaded up in the truck and brought it to Winchester. There was no freight elevator in this building, so luckily there were plenty of people to carry it up the 2 flights of steps for me. Got it all assembled. They, late in the game, asked me to build some benches for it, so I'm working on that and hope to have those done in the next week or two. I'm proud to have been part of YHB for almost 30 years and was honored to be asked to build this table for them and their new office space in Winchester. Thanks for stopping by.